Hello there, I'm Kristaps Andrejsons. I'm a Latvian journalist and a historian from Riga, Latvia. Well, right now from Ludza, Latvia, since I just literally moved yesterday. I have been doing a podcast for now 13 years explaining Soviet history, but, well, a couple of years before the war started, I switched over to doing politics as well and current events because I got a lot of questions about this. Right now, well, I have reported from Ukraine front lines a couple of times, to be exact, 4 separate trips there. And also I translate and explain to Western audiences what Russian vatniks say in their own channels and what do they think about all this stuff, and try to show them the whole Russian mentality and how that works, basically.
What first got you interested in studying Soviet and Russian culture and bloggers in the first place?
To be fair, I started out with the history of the Soviet Union because, well, my family, of course, as I'm a Latvian, our family also suffered in the Soviet occupation, and their stories were just crazy, about the Soviet army and all the events happening there. And I just did this for my college. And then there was this history podcaster, Dan Carlin, who made a very big podcast, Hardcore History, and that was back in 2013, where podcasts were new, and he told me to do this. But then I understood that, well, I always explained, the people, how people lived through this period, because in history books you only hear about the big events, and everything is kind of, there is not enough human inside those stories. And right now in the war, when the war started, the full-scale invasion. Sorry, even before that, I was checking out the whole separatist movement, right? But I understood that in a lot of cases, people in the West, they take what propaganda says from the Russian side and presume that it's real. And over here, if you look at all the Vatnik media, the same old nemesis Igor Girkin. By the way, the Klub Rozsерженных Patriotov, Club of Angry Patriots, I have trademarked that in EU, and I sell merch of that in my store so that they can't make any sales in the Baltics. We have Igor Girkin's sad face with missiles and drones around them too. But I just understood that when they complained about the problems in their army, because these guys are the fanatics, they have gone crazy, right? But when they speak about problems in the Russian position and what's going on there, as they want to win and as they believe in this, then you know that they're speaking truth. Because when they speak about their successes, they'll be lying all the time, but that doesn't matter. But if you look at them, you can find out the real situation without all this, Konashenkov nonsense, which is on TV and all this stuff. And then I understood that it also not only gives me accurate information to be used about the real situation, what's going on there. Also, I know that in Russia, Denis Kazansky does the same thing. Hi to him if he's watching this. Drew a lot of inspiration from him as well. But I understood that people in the West also need to understand the fact that Russia is a completely different. It's not a normal country in the sense that every other country is, because their mindset is very tied into this worship of Putin, and it's more like a religious experience to them, sort of this third Rome. When they say third Rome, right, and stuff like that, you should be taking them seriously. And I understood that if you don't understand the cultural parts behind their beliefs, then people, especially in Western analysts, they make, worse predictions. Like in the early war, when Prigozhin was doing his march on Moscow, and he has sat in Soviet prison. I was reading what Institute for Study of War was publishing from him, and they just outright ignored everything when he was speaking in this Soviet prison slang, Fenya. So I got to write the Foreign Policy magazine article about explaining poniatiia to Westerners, which is fucking difficult, to be honest, because, oh my, writing that in English to people where there is very few sources in English, that was difficult. But yeah, I think you really have to know this cultural part. And also, they're a great source of information there. I hope that answers this.
What is the most surprising thing that you have discovered about Russia that Westerners don't usually know?
Interestingly enough, it's the same thing that was in the Soviet Union, because a lot of people presume that everyday things are just as, they know what normal for them is. And that Soviet Union, for example, never produced female hygiene products. And a lot of those, like packets or tampons, right? And a lot of those everyday things which are normal for them, for example, they presume that every hospital in Russia must have running water, 100%. They don't understand the fact that Moscow and St. Petersburg is not Russia completely. And that it's, basically, what I try to also explain here is that which I did not understand the extent of until I really started studying this, was that Russia basically is a colonial empire, like British Empire, but on land, because all the regions where like Russia, where basically no Russians live, like the Buryats, Tatars, all those people, right? Like they get treated like colonies because all the money goes to Moscow, all the businesses registered to Moscow. You get oil somewhere, you get diamonds somewhere, but the locals don't see anything of it. I knew there was corruption there, but well, I have to be honest, even as a historian and a person who's heard all these tales, because I was born in 1989, I still very late Soviet Union managed to jump in, but I heard all these stories from my parents and everything. But when you get into how deep all this mess goes on, that is difficult to explain, and also the fact that, as I always say to people, you always have to presume that Russia lies, because that is their strategy, because a normal person in the West, you cannot, it's hard for them to imagine that a government can always, 100% of cases, start out with lies and only tell the truth in rare occasions, very, very rarely, and then like you find it surprising. That stuff, it's like, it's not something like big or something, it's like these everyday things which they presume can't be true because it's like so unnatural, so to speak. It's not normal to an extent that it's hard for them to even accept, and often cases, especially in the beginning, people thought I was lying. Also because I was already feeling that, some problems might actually start, and I was warning people about this since 2018. So everyone was like shocked in 2022. Meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, well, we didn't know the precise date, but this. No one here was really shocked, to be honest, that much. We already knew that something was about to happen, just didn't know the exact time. That's about that.
One interesting thing that I noticed is that some people on the West have this weird fascination with Russia. Us, like me and you people living next to them, we don't have that. We know things that were happening in the Soviet Union. We knew that there were literally no pizza delivery. We know that the first Russian toilet paper factory was literally installed 8 years after Gagarin went to space, and things like that. Where does this weird fascination, admiration of the Russian Empire originates in the West?
It is similar as with the British people in America and over here. It's some of the similar with Russians, because if you live right next to it, you see all of the Russians. But people in the West, the further west you go, I mean, who can go there? Which are the Russians that they see? Athletes, artists, rich people, basically, with some education levels. And they automatically, if those are the only Russians because everyone else in Russia goes to vacations on Turkey and Thailand, and we all know about the Russian tourists very well, right? So I think that it comes from the people that they see, and there's also this branding issue, because outside of Russia they all go with this Russian toughness, right? They'll tough it out. Meanwhile, inside of Russia, this whole toughness and that they're tough and enduring, that turns them into terpili. They're ready to basically just endure everything. It's somewhat shifted. It's the fact that they presume that all Russians must be somewhat like those that they see that come over there, and at least know how to act properly, and they see only the wealthier and educated people, but that is part one. And secondly, that Putin's regime uses these people very well. All the oligarchs, they send their sons abroad, they send them to the best schools, and they spread this ideology that Putin is trying to spread as well. Putin's team is Putin's team knows that only the wealthier people can go abroad, and he's using them very well in their hybrid war tactics. So that's also a part of all this stuff.
Kristaps, you've spoken about Russia's prison culture. How does it shape Russian politics and Russian army?
Oh, I can quote Putin on many occasions. For example, in English, there is when they translated the "machich v sartire," all this, they was like, yeah, we're gonna beat them in the bathroom. Well, machich v sartire and beat them in the bathroom are two different things. Although if you translate them literally, it is the same thing technically, but it's not. But it translates in the sense that Putin himself comes from this lake cooperative or cooperative ozero. It's an organized crime group, and obviously he definitely has understanding of how those prison laws work, and he acts the same way. And as I try to explain to people, he doesn't want to make deals because there is no deal making in that culture. There is no business as such. There is only, the one who is scamming the other person and the one who is the loser who's being scammed. And if you're making an honest deal, that is dishonorable in there, because they live by these rules over there. And that is a part, all that culture, well, at least here, where we have been fighting this post-Soviet mentality, which is a part of all this. But still, it's going away. But even here in Latvia, everyone still uses words like halyava, which means getting something for free. Basically, I don't exactly know how to translate that. But which comes from that culture. But over there, this culture basically has been. Well, everyone else has been trying to get out of this Soviet prison, even the mental one, right? But over there, they have embraced it because that was the time where their empire was at the greatest state. When they thought everyone was doing. Because what Russians don't understand is that to them, the problems of the Soviet Union were only economical, because they didn't feel this whole idea about, how they come in and they turn every street Russia. They try to eliminate your culture, your national celebrations get thrown away. They did not feel all that stuff. My father was in the opera at the time. He was a musician. He traveled abroad with Riga Opera, and he said that, you could find friends everywhere outside of Russia and Soviet Federation. You go to Armenia, Georgia, Ukraine, everywhere. You go there and you say, hello, we're from the Baltics, and everyone understands you because it's a similar situation. But over there, with these people, they cannot. Because my wife is Belarusian, and we spoke about this, and she said that the biggest thing that comes from that culture there and that is fixated there is that they cannot accept that they are wrong. They cannot admit that they are wrong and fix something. So the biggest problem is where also their idea that Tsar is good and boyars are bad comes. That also is involving with the Third Rome thing, but also from this prison system where bratva, or whatever, how do you call it, blatnie, are at the very top, and every error that you make in this system gets punished very heavily. Like, it's easy to go down the case, but impossible to go up, right? So they apply this to everyday life in the sense that if you make a mistake, then you lose your honor, your face, and and that causes them to basically report that we have taken this, we have totally taken this village, half of Pokrovsk already, 3/4 of Pokrovsk. In 2 weeks they will have destroyed 5 billion Heimat. You cannot admit any mistakes because that is seen as the biggest personal tragedy ever, which causes them to kind of just get deeper and deeper, and that influences the army in the sense that there's a lot of them, but as I can tell from all the Vatnik media that I'm reading, it is hurting them a lot lately because in the television, if the television says all the time that no, army has everything that they need and that they're winning, so that is why the people are not helping their army and they don't want to, and also this is why they are on paper they have taken way much more than they're actually are controlling. And also why Putin is at this point totally detached from any realities on the ground completely. He's just living in his own little fantasy world where he can invent any numbers because he doesn't use internet at all. He just reads them from the papers that he's been given, and they're obviously at this point, if he will be told the real situation, he will just not believe it, and just no one will do this ever. It's this constant culture of trying to, instead of solving the problems or dealing with everything honestly, just to push everything under the rug. Make it someone else's problem. Make sure my papers are clean. That sort of situation.
I remember in 2022 or 2023, on 9th of May, the Russian so-called Victory Day, they were saying that Russian army is basically fighting in the outskirts of Lviv. They were posting, those war maps and stuff like that. Do you think that Russians understand that they are being lied to, or they just don't care, or how to call it?
Most people kind of don't want to accept it. It's again this whole idea that we're wrong at something. They're very good at separating Putin's Russia with Ramzan Kadyrov and all this mess from somehow this idealized image of Russia in their head, especially in Igor Girkin's crowd and everyone who's what was this guy who was the people's governor of Donetsk, who's now in trouble. That person, I forgot his name now. All these people, they somehow separate this idea that the Russia that they're sort of fighting for, it's somehow different from the one that they're actually living in. So they can yell at Putin, they can do whatever. They somehow split it off and think that it's not that is somehow not Russia. And yet they still go and fight for all their duchies here. I cannot comprehend that in my head. It is somehow some sort of logical dysfunction, because again, I think they don't believe in this, and at least they can't admit it, because that would mean that they have been wrong at something and they have been tricked, and they can't admit this because then they are afraid that they'll lose face, and straight to Parasha they'll go in their own minds, and it's going to be like that forever.
Kristaps, do you think that Putin's chauvinism is based on the ideology of Alexander Dugin, the famous Russian fascist?
Oh, I have a friend from the United States who makes a podcast called History Impossible, and we have been talking about Dugin for a long time because he's actually studied him. And I think it's more... there was this guy before him who was a Nazi supporter, and then he switched over, Ilya Ilyin. I think it all sort of comes from there. But actually, I have to say that Putin was sort of converted to this, not by Dugin, but by Solzhenitsyn, surprisingly enough, back in 2006 or 7, since he was a true believer in this idea of Holy Orthodox Russia, to which they make their weird Christian Orthodox socialism ideas who offend both socialists and Christians, but it doesn't matter because they're neither. I think because Solzhenitsyn in his later life got a bit insane, right, and believed in that stuff, and he was a huge fan of Putin, and they communicated, so I think it comes from there. Dugin is sort of the modern version of this, but I think a lot of people on the Vatnik sphere, they don't actually like Dugin that much, because Dugin, they would probably associate Dugin with this Akhranot, as they call it, the people who support the official propaganda, that everything is very much rosy and doing successfully. Dugin sort of fell off in a way in this philosophy, since he's very much interested into this money part.
One of the biggest misconceptions that, for example, supporters of the Russian terrorism, or literally people who don't know here in the European countries have, is that Russia can be negotiated with. We can basically live peacefully with Russians bordering that huge empire. What would you say to people who have this standpoint?
Either read my article about poniatiia or listen to my recent episode about this, and understand that you're dealing with not a world leader, but someone who's actively trying to scam you. To scam you and to trick you and to cheat you is what is considered good and nice and honorable there. And, the fact that Russia has broken every treaty it has ever signed, sooner or later, like you have to be, you have to be stupid to believe that if this whole thing continues and nothing changes inside there, that it somehow will be this time magically totally. Trust me, bro, it's gonna be fine. We're gonna stick by this. No, it's gonna be just another rearmament, and And look, previously, for example, as we in the Baltics have been speaking about this in the EU for a long while, that Russia is not to be trusted, and we warned people about all this happening here. They called us paranoid, and that we're taking this too personally. Well, maybe when we turned out to be correct, maybe you should sort of listen to the other stuff that we keep telling you all the time as well. Since all the deals that have been signed with Russia basically have been just broken up, so something will change, and they will just discard them completely and throw them away. Would you sit down and play poker with someone who is known to constantly cheat, and not just cheat once or twice, but literally cheat in every card, even if they don't, even when they don't need to cheat, they will somehow, because recently I found out in the news that's, by the way, still just before I think it was during the COVID era in 2020. Back then already there was this massive scandal about doping in the Russian sports in the Sochi Olympics, where they also, and we still keep doing this, because yesterday the news it came out that one of our athletes in biathlon, he managed to increase his position there, because even today they find out that even in more sports, Russia has cheated somehow. Look, they will cheat you even in cases where they don't need to, just because making an honest deal with you and then living by this deal is something that they just it is. If Putin does this, he will lose respect in the eyes of his oligarchs, and he will be seen as a weak ruler. That's why he physically cannot do this at all. And that's the sad reality. You either can accept this or you can make another deal. And I would say, if say Hungary wants to make a deal with Russia, sure, make a separate deal, see how that goes. We'll wait here, okay? I mean, It's one of those cases where we have been through this so many times. Reality says otherwise. You simply cannot make a proper, long-lasting peace with Russia, especially when their whole, like I said, when they have a bunch of these vatniks also who just consider their empire building the most important thing ever. And to these people, the fact that you do not want to be a part of some mega large Russian empire alone is like a sinful endeavor already. You're already a bad person just for not wanting to be in the Russian empire. By the way, during the Soviet era, this is an important thing. What saved us here in the Baltics is we're smaller nations, right? Because Russians thought the Ukrainians and Belarusians are also Russian, they sent when they tried to Russify all of us, they sent a bunch of Belarusians and Ukrainians here. But you see, Belarusians and Ukrainians actually learned Latvian and respected our culture. So we managed not to be completely Russified just because they thought that you guys are all Russian anyway. So we got sent a bunch of you people in. Which sort of saved my own language too, because they wanted to Russify us, but it's their own ideology.
I noticed one interesting thing when you speak to the Westerners about the dangers of the Russian disinformation, and they usually go, well, it's a normal thing because our medias lie, our politicians also lie, so basically it's the same in Russia and here in Europe. What is your opinion on that?
In Europe, when politicians lie and they get caught, then they get into trouble. Then there's a scandal normally. In Russia, if someone would start to tell the truth, then they would get in trouble. There would be a scandal. There would be a massive problem already, because it's the whole. Even if okay, let us presume that you would have like an honest politician who genuinely wanted to do something good there. In the current system, they would easily either be sent to jail straight away, or mysteriously discover the wonders of falling out of a window. I heard that's all the rage these days in Russia. Or like yesterday, they found I think it was a governor. Yeah, I think it was a governor whom they found who hanged himself, but his arms were like tied behind his back. I mean, that's a magical like loops around there, but obviously no criminal case, nothing. This is why I also think that naive people who believe that Russia also can just easily reform in the same borders as it is now without splitting apart, they're very naive, because at this point, what will the regional teacher who's used to getting extra payment when the elections come, will she just go and ask, well, for whom do I stuff the ballot boxes this time? And then she's going to say, well, for no one. And then she's going to be more shocked, not because now they're going to have fair elections, but because I was counting on these 5,000 rubles or whatever, how much they get paid. It's not much, actually. But she'll be more shocked that she's not getting paid, and then she'll go to protest because she's not getting paid. That's the level of corruption there.
In 2022, interesting document emerged in Wikipedia, namely the list of mysterious deaths in Russia that involves a lot of Russian oligarchs, Russian military, and many people who knew too much. In your personal opinion, what does it mean, for example, for people who retransmit Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation on the West? Should they stay away from open windows and suspicious tea?
Those who honestly believe, those who are not getting paid, they'll be fine, because they are just treated as, the KGB used to look at the communist parties of, say, France like this. They were like, those dumb people want to do stuff for us for free? Okay, that is how they got treated. These people will be just used and thrown aside like used condoms. It's very simple for them. They at least don't have to worry. People who have actually moved to Russia, they like to show these Americans, oftentimes they move back while they still can, but they might be in trouble. But once the whole thing comes crashing down, I think people in the West, they won't be thrown out of windows, but they will have some interesting conversations from people from certain offices at one point, definitely, because there are receipts for you, because I know how much Russia likes bureaucracy and paperwork, and they keep it all the time, and pretty sure that everything of that already can be found on dark web. But I'm pretty sure that these people who are taking the big money from Russia in the West, they don't understand how much the Russians who are over there, they will betray them at the first opportunity, if that will mean that they will themselves get off some sort of thing. So if you're taking this money, well, it's not if you will be betrayed and if your contacts with Russian foundations will be relieved. It's when.
What do you think Ukraine can teach the rest of Europe and the world after this war is over?
Ukraine's advantage is the fact that well, look, you guys have the proper motivation. You know what you're fighting for, and that's a really important thing. Because if the more I read reports by Russian soldiers, they're already complaining that everyone's doing this for the money. Interestingly enough, I have a friend who makes a podcast about history of computing, like computers and everything, and then we discovered that yes, even all the Soviet cybernetics, such as they had all the experiments also happened around in Ukraine. Because you guys are pulling up all the good old engineering traditions and then building great stuff. And hey, look, I can't complain because for one, you're showing the world how these technologies and this innovativeness and this courage can beat off a stronger opponent. And look, I live in a country with just 2 million people, and this might prove very useful to me as well, especially living out here in the middle of nowhere. So that's in the technological sense. On the other hand, I really think that it also shows the fact that sometimes just having tons of tanks is really not enough, because they're still better than nothing, but it's not the 80s anymore, and how situation is moving on. And sometimes, I think the Western governments will have to learn from Ukraine. Please help out nice Ukrainian men get rid of some dirt that's stuck in their land. I would put it that way.